Hey, welcome back, everyone. It's Joe Driscoll here with Salt City Grind. This is episode 10. We've had a great run thus far, and I'm really excited to welcome our guest today, Hasan Stevens. How you doing today, brother?
Good. How are you, man? Thanks for having me.
Good. No, I'm very, very glad to have you, man. For the folks that don't know you, who are very few and far between in this area, let's get into the weeds about your organization, Good Life Foundation, first and foremost. Well, I guess maybe we start with the easier one to describe. You are DJ Maestro.
Yes, sir.
Yes, tell us about DJ Maestro first.
DJ Maestro. I have a long history here in Syracuse, DJing with Clear Channel, which is now known as iHeart Media. I was on Power 106.9. I was on Hot 107.9. I DJed at Kiss FM in Rochester. I've worked at MTV, BET, co-hosted BET Rap City in the Basement, did a lot of things. Then I transitioned into, at one point I was the official DJ for the New York Jets, for the training. I'm the official DJ for Syracuse University, or I was doing the Dome games. Currently I just do the internal school activities. So that's a brief background. I'm still rocking on the ones and twos and holding it down, man. Always, forever.
No doubt. I've always enjoyed you at the Q's basketball games and stuff. That's always a good time.
Now there's DJ Bella. Shout out to DJ Bella. She's holding it down right now.
Oh, she's holding it down now?
Yeah.
You were a few years ago, though, right?
Yeah, I did it for several years. She's been doing the men's games for the last year, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so from there, let's go into the heavier work you're doing with Good Life Foundation, and tell people what Good Life Foundation is and what you guys are up to.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, my focus really was targeted on Good Life and the issues that are happening here in Syracuse. And so the Good Life Foundation, we are located at the Southside Innovation Center. We are an organization that works with the top 1% of at-risk youth, system-involved youth in Syracuse and Onondaga County. So we are not only working with kids, we're working with kids actually in 3 entry points. So we work with kids inside youth prisons. We work with kids in the school district. So we're in 4 schools in the school district, STEM, Lincoln, Henniger, and Clary. And we are also working with kids in the community. And so primarily the community kids that we're working with are system involved, going through probation, or they are maybe someone that is supervised, right? They're on supervision, or just getting into trouble slightly, and we want to prevent that as a preventative, model as well to prevent them from going back into the system.
So how many kids do y'all work with in general?
With this past year, we worked with a total of close to 750 kids.
Wow.
But again, those are in different programs. So we have, different populations. The majority of the kids that we work with are in the Syracuse City School District, but the kids that we work most intensely with are the kids in the 315 Lift program, which is a community-based partnership between us and the Center for Court Innovation.
Okay. And so what does that look like with your more hands-on stuff, the ones that you really, the kids that you give extra attention to? What does it look like an average day, or, from week to week? What kind of influence and impact, what kind of activities are you doing with the kids to engage them and get them involved?
Sure. So essentially, throughout our organization, we weave hip hop culture. We utilize hip hop culture as a vehicle for understanding, for retention, for getting kids attracted to the program, for an opportunity to have the language that we can speak to them in a language that they understand, and speak to them in through the music that they love the most. And so we use that to focus on entrepreneurship primarily. We focus on life skills, and then of course there's also just general community-based skills. So we try to combine identity, purpose, and community together in our programs. That said, each program again specifically targets a different population, and the hardcore population, I would say, these are kids that are it's a smaller percentage, but we're working with about 40 kids annually in this particular program, and those kids unfortunately represent the majority of the incidents with kids here in Syracuse, and the majority of what we would account for as recidivism going in and out of the system. And so our goal is to reduce that. In fact, we've actually been very successful in reducing that. In 2015, the county identified 3 zip codes with the highest youth recidivism rates, and that was 05, 04, and 07. And within a year and a half of working in the collaborative with them, we were able to reduce those zip codes amongst the lowest in youth recidivism. We currently have a 50% recidivism rate. And while some people might say that sounds, well, just half the kids might, somehow get into contact with the system again. Just to give you a perspective and idea, the county identified that the kids that are not in our program, that are within this small cohort of youth, they recidivate at 100% if they're not in our program. So we've been able to reduce that by 50%. We also are talking about long term. So we're not 6 months, 1 year. We stay with these kids for the long haul. Once you build a relationship, it's important that we maintain it. And so you asked about what a daily activity would look like. Today we took kids fishing, talked about the concept of teaching a person how to fish versus, actually handing them the fish. And that's really a minor example. We do anything from take kids on trips. We've taken kids to Washington, D.C. We've taken kids to New York City. And it's an opportunity, we call it an escape your reality trip. And it's an opportunity for them to get away from the 2-block radius that they're used to and they're confined to. We know that geographically here in Syracuse, a lot of kids can't even walk over 2 blocks out of fear for their life. And so it's very important that we expose kids to new opportunities and new places, because it changes and shifts their perspective about their current home and how to engage with it. We pair kids up with an individual life coach. And so our life coaches are, there's a common term now that's going around, it's called credible messenger. And what it means is that there are people that maybe previously have experienced a run-in, with the system or something like that, but have totally changed their lives around. But they walk with that experience and that story, which oftentimes gives them much more credibility and a connectivity to the kids. And so we utilize them to really engage the kids on a one-on-one basis. And then we do group activities as well. And we've got a really cool system when it comes to daily activities, because we liken it to the construction of a song. So because everything that we do is focused on hip hop, and this as an artist more than many people, the various components of a song. You have the hook, you've got the bridge, you've got the intro, you've got all these different components. And so we really model our activities after all of those. So a hook is a fun event that will draw and retain kids. Our retention rate is close to 99% because kids want to be around us. They call us because they have fun, but they also are learning stuff. We've got introductions where we introduce kids to who they are, to their own personal identity and their history. We've got bridges where on an individual basis, life coaches can take kids out and build a bridge and a bond between them, right? So that we can get the feedback that we need, for all of the kids that we serve. So, we've got some other different components, but it gives you a gist, an idea about how we weave and incorporate, hip hop, among other things, through our program.
I think you got the mic there. You got your hand over the mic there at the end.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you lose me?
Yeah, I lost you there for a second. It's all right. But yeah, we got most of that. Most of that was in. So when you talk about utilizing hip hop, do you guys actually encourage them to compose and is rhyming and beat production, any of that stuff come into play when you're trying to engage the youth?
So yes, not on a wide scale. So we try to work with youth based on their interests, right? So for the kids that are into music, that produce, that we've got some kids that are producing that we've helped, along the way. We've got kids that do photography from a hip hop perspective, right? So it's not always about music. Sometimes hip hop. I think when people hear hip hop, they always think the music alone, but we're talking about the culture. We're talking about artwork, graffiti. We're talking about teaching kids how to DJ. For example, our program Beyond 16 Bars in the prison, we go to a youth prison out towards Ithaca, and we teach kids how to DJ, and then we teach them the business behind DJing. We have kids that are interested in writing, but here's the thing: whether they want to be an artist or not, we still can utilize the music and the lyrics to do a lot of things. Here's an example: talking about financial literacy through the lens of a hip hop song, breaking down the financial components, right? There's a lot of hip hop songs that talk about financial literacy. There's a lot of hip hop songs that talk about entrepreneurship, that talk about life skills, right?
Yep.
So we are breaking down those lyrics and talking with them, from the artists that they respect and that they love.
Yep. Amazing. We're not trying to hop in and out real quick. Trying to make a business out of this, man.
Right.
So our seeds can have some for themselves.
Absolutely.
So I love it. So, I've been bringing on a lot of people that I just respect in the neighborhood, and I would bring you on a normal day for, just your everyday work. But recently we had these rallies around, the murder of George Floyd and everything that's gone on. And, you spoke very eloquently and passionately at the rally that we had on Thursday in Foreman. So why don't you, if you don't mind going into some of that, the story you told, your personal story with police brutality and why you were a speaker at that rally,
Yeah, I mean, I was young. I was young in my 20s, and I wish I knew then what I know now. I wish I knew about my rights. I wish I knew about how to respond. I wish I knew a lot of things, but I almost lost my life here in Syracuse, and I was a on-air personality, a jockey, as DJ Maestro, and we were doing an event downtown, which at the time the place was called RJ Lanigan's. It's now C something, Clinton Street Pub, I think, CSP.
Right.
And we were doing an event. It was the only bar that primarily catered to people of color. And like many times that we've seen, historically throughout Syracuse, the bars that predominantly were occupied by whites were left alone. They really don't have any issues. The cops don't bother them. But what has happened is that we had cops that were coming to our bar. So we let out, it was a very peaceful night. We let out the bar and people were just hanging around because it was warm and everybody wanted to just hang around. No different from what their white counterparts were doing down the road, down the block. And so the cops came along and said, everybody move it along, everybody push, keep it moving. And, people were just like, why? Like, why do we have to move, but they don't, right? And so they started getting aggressive and they started getting physical. They started arresting people. They said, if you don't go, we're going to start arresting people for loitering. So they started handcuffing people. And upon, we were packing up. I came out as an on-air personality and I witnessed a young black woman who was being arrested, and she was handcuffed and she was bent over. And she honestly was not really resisting arrest at all. She was just handcuffed. The officer, she was saying something out of, from her mouth. The officer assaulted her, kicked her in her chest, and I spoke up. I didn't understand it. She was already handcuffed. I didn't understand. That officer that I spoke to, I yelled out and I said, yo, what you're doing is unconstitutional. I said, that's illegal. You're wrong. And they basically turned around and told me to shut up. They started approaching me. I backed up with my hands in the air, and they said, you're under arrest. I guess disorderly conduct. I don't know what the charge was at the time. I yelled out to everyone, everybody pay attention. I'm not resisting arrest. I'm not resisting arrest. I handed them my hands behind and let them handcuff me. And after I was handcuffed, one of the cops passed by and maced me, sprayed mace in my face. I have a history of asthma. And so from the time, if you could imagine, from the time that we were there at the place, they placed me in the back of what they call the paddy wagon, or the truck that holds prisoners, and they arrested more people. There was a total of 8 of us that night. From that time all the way down to the time that we were in a holding cell. And even in the holding cell, they placed me in the holding cell and did not neutralize the mace. So this whole time I'm fighting to breathe. My bodily fluids are coming out of every hole in my face. And I passed out on the floor. There's a gentleman here in Syracuse that was also handcuffed. So we remained handcuffed in the holding cell. There's a man here that literally got on his knees and had to wipe my face and move clear fluids from my nostrils as best he could with the crotch of his pants. And that was the only way that I survived, because I was having trouble breathing. They screamed in the cell, and they called for the police to help me because I was passing out. And eventually, Chief Duvall, who was the chief at the time, heard and got wind. I believe my boss gave a call. My program director at the time gave a call to him, and he called down and said, basically like, yo, you know who you have down there? Get him out immediately. And so they took me out of the cell. Eventually, they picked me up. They neutralized the mace, and they brought us up to a different area, the circle or whatever, where they do like the booking and things like that. Now, the interesting thing about it was that in that circle, internal affairs came in to speak to us. And so internal affairs said that it was odd because there were 8 people that were arrested and none of us had any priors. So there were 7 black people and 1 white person, and the 1 white person was a white male lawyer that was walking by at the time that decided to speak up and say that what they were doing was wrong and illegal. And they took him and detained him and arrested him as well. And so, again, those instances where we have white allies that speak up for wrongdoing that get into trouble along with us as well. So I appreciate that. But they were concerned that no one had ever had any priors. Why did they arrest, 8 people that virtually did not even appear to be troublemakers in any way, shape, or form? So that was my experience. And, we see the correlation with what happened with George Floyd, because that man knelt on his neck for 8 minutes and change, with no regard for whether he could breathe, with no regard for whether or not his activities were going to harm.
Oh, I think we lost Hasan. Back.
How's that? Sorry about that.
Yeah, y'all good?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we lost you
Yes.
just for a second.
Yep.
So the last thing we heard you say was they sat on his neck with no regard for causing him harm or anything.
Yeah, and so essentially, that's what happened to me. You don't mace someone and leave them unneutralized to suffer that pain. That was punishment. That was punishment for speaking up. Punishment for actually engaging in a constitutional right. They punished me, and they made me sit there burning and with difficulty of breathing because I decided to speak up. And that's abuse of power. So we see the correlation, the lack of value, the lack of regard for Black lives and Black bodies.
So what was the final outcome of that exchange? Was there ever any accountability? I mean, did you pursue it with the CRB or in any court of law or any accountability that occurred afterwards?
So, I was very young and really didn't know the different processes. And you can imagine when I say that, for someone who's college educated, for someone who is, was on the radio, you could imagine what the common citizen who may not be as connected or may not be, could you imagine what they have to go through and what they face without knowing the knowledge that they need in order to follow through? One of the reasons, we talk about 50A, that reveals, the transparency. It gives transparency to the accountability. I was not able to know what happened to the officer. I didn't know what type of accountability he had to face. And that's one of the reasons why I am so adamant about, that being signed. I don't know if, did Cuomo sign it yet?
I'm not sure. I know it's on his desk. It went through legislature, so I'm not sure.
I know they said he's going to sign, but I don't know if
he will sign it soon. I don't know if he's done it yet.
Yeah. So, just an example of like one piece of legislation that I think is really, really important because of examples that happened to me, right? The other thing was ways in which companies and capitalism, corporations, buy in to systemic oppression or a part of systemic oppression. And so I am open and honest about what happened as a DJ. I've always wanted to be a DJ. That was my dream. That was, that's what I did. And being on the air, I initially came on the air and I spoke about it. I was told by my immediate supervisor that I could speak about it and talk, and I did. I had people protesting in front of the public safety building and the police union. We start to see the history of the repeated roles of the police union. The police union came up to the radio station and basically said that you got to get him to stop talking on the air. You got to get him to stop talking on the air. And I was threatened with my job, and as a result, it was a clear situation where if I kept talking, I wasn't going to be on the air. And being a young kid who wants to be on radio, who loves radio, I did what any young kid probably would have done at the time. Had I known what I know now, things would have turned out a little bit different, I think.
Yeah.
So.
No, that absolutely makes sense. And we see, similar to what we saw with Kaepernick, the same thing about, denying someone their livelihood if they dare to speak up, and it's very easy to make righteous stands when you're not looking down the barrel of deciding between your dream and a righteous stand, of if you're going to be the one sacrificed on the fire, and will your sacrifice really even mean anything or move the needle? You don't know those things at the time, especially when you're young and you're ambitious. So I guess talk to us about, your feelings about the, the movements that have gone on, the rallies that have gone on. Did you speak at the rally on Saturday as well?
No, I didn't. I just marched and I took it in. It was a beautiful sight. It was a lot of people. I listened and just marched.
Yeah. So what you're feeling about? So like, I guess I would be curious to hear. For example, a lot of people are bantering around the defunding concept right now about police and a lot of stuff. What's your feelings about the marches going on? And I mean, do you feel like stuff? For me personally, I'm very excited to see the package of legislation that Assemblywoman Hunter was rolling out, that the Black and Hispanic and Puerto Rican Asian caucus across the state is rolling out. I think there's a lot of stuff around accountability and transparency that I think will help, go a long way in creating some changes that are needed. Do you feel like the defund me movement is something that we should be pondering, or do you feel more like we have to make incremental changes with something like the legislation that we've seen?
I think that is a combination of both. I think defund me is important, right? Because we know that there's been a hyper militarization of police in schools, and there's not a reason for a police station to have a tank. Why are we, you're talking about local policing. Why do you have a tank? Which home are you looking to explode and blow up, right?
Right.
We have to be a little more realistic about what's needed for policing and also who needs to do the policing. So from my perspective, there's a lot of things that need to change. I think we need to change, policies around who can actually be police. What percentage of them live in the city? What percentage of them represent and look like the people that they're policing? I think there need to be, some checks and balances around the union contract, around, the level of power that the police union has. I am not, shy about saying that Piedmont is someone that I believe needs to go, and the union, needs to have a level of accountability for whether it's from the CRB or for the community. The police need to be held accountable. There, 50A, I'm waiting for that to literally cross the finish line, because we need to know what happens to police officers. I don't want to hear, well, we took care of it. He's taking care of, or she's taking care of. That's not acceptable. We need to know, how did you take care of them, because they're public servants, they work for the people, and how are they actually being taught? I think that there's policies that need to be shifted around training. A basic implicit bias training is not enough. It's not enough, right? So, we don't often think about customer service. We think of customer service in the retail, professions, right? But there is a level of customer service that is required in terms of engagement with populations and communities. If I personally have experienced officers who the first thing out of their mouths is aggressive, it's angry, it's violent, right? Because words can be violent also. And you're talking about de-escalating and setting the tone. How can you handle and manage a situation if you don't know how to speak, right? We know words can incite wars. Um, I think that there needs to be some policies around the level of education for police officers. So I think we need to reinvent and rethink what policing looks like, because we all know the history of policing. We know where it comes from. We know why it was instituted. And we also know traditionally the types of people that were placed in there. You know, we have a lot of good cops. You know, my wife is a cop. I love the way my wife polices. You know, we need more cops like my wife. I know some good cops, some really good cops throughout the years. It wasn't until Syracuse that I really experienced that, right? But the point is that we need to have more good cops, and the bad apples with the accountability. Let's get them out. If you cannot handle, here's the thing: the services that we give at Good Life, we deal with some kids that really have been through some things. They have family issues, they have behavior issues, all these different things. We know that there might be an instance where a kid might fire back at us, where a kid might be disrespectful. Now, if I responded every single time to that child with anger and met fire with fire, then I would not be suited for the responsibilities and the services that I do, right? The
Yeah.
same thing goes with police. And I hear often, well, you can't treat police like this, and we hear from officers, and you know what? This is the job that you signed up for. The way you're going to diffuse that and the way that you're going to handle that is through your customer service, the way in which you engage and approach people. I've seen cops, I've seen video, and I've seen it in person, where people have come at a police officer a certain way, and they literally have talked their way, and by the time that they're done, they de-escalated the situation, and the person that was originally aggressive towards them, which, by the way, rightfully, when you have had historical systemic oppression and violence from the hands of police, they see badges, they see colors, and they see uniforms, right? You can kind of assuage all of that literally by the way that you respond. And I was always taught that response is 10 times more valuable and more important than the initial stimulus. You understand? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Whatever starts it, the way you respond to it is more important. And that's what we have to be training our police officers to do.
Yeah, absolutely. As someone who, my career as well before getting into public office was was an entertainer, traveling around, playing bars, and all the time. That was a frequent occurrence. When alcohol is involved, and 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. and you're exactly right with the power of words. So many times I would hop in between a bouncer and an individual just to, talk it down. Just get in there, and it's amazing what the intent of de-escalation. And once you start developing those skill sets of listening to people, and kind of I'm taking what you're saying in and trying to negotiate the situation, we can do so much more with it. So I'll go to, I always put out on socials before I have my guests on, if people want to submit questions, and try to make this a community conversation as we go to social media, engage other people and say, what kind of topics would you like us to discuss? So this was something that was sent in by a friend. To address systemic racism, is there a collective effort that is centralized, such as like a union or an NAACP locally, to consolidate the asks for underserved areas? And this is something that I've been involved in organizing and advocacy. When I was before in office, when I was just a musician, I would do a lot of social activism and advocacy, and you'd find a lot of times, for example, the Occupy movement. We had the world's attention for a good 6 months there, but there was no real leaders. You can't name to me the people who were Occupy. It became a hashtag and a movement, rather than something like when we had Malcolm and Martin and that era, where the movement was identified by leaders. The leaders had specific asks, and we've moved away from that to a more, Black Lives Matter, for example, while it does have some centralized leadership, mostly different branches opening up, having their own individual asks and stuff like that, rather than nationalized organ. So what are your thoughts about, is there a collective ask locally and nationally, and who are the organizations that are making those asks on behalf of, systemic racism trying to end this?
Before I go into the different organizations that are representative of the voice, right? I want to bring light to the history of America. When we've had leaders like that, Dr. King, Malcolm X, they've been assassinated, right? And
Yep.
so we have literally a socialization of a people to never have those types of leaders again. And when we've had them after the fact, their characters were assassinated. And
Yep.
so, we've had these pop-ups here and there of people who are, clearly vocal, clearly representative of the interests and needs for a group of people. But there's a lot of dissension, and the dissension comes from a number of things. And I always talk about the socializing of African Americans throughout this systemic oppression from slavery until current times. And we talk about the ways in which we were taught to battle each other, to fight against each other, to not trust each other, to, that is a remnant of psychological slavery that still exists today, I believe. So that's one factor. The other factor is that, whenever a leader pops out, there are, and this is historical. This is not conspiracy theory. This is historical and factual, that there have been entities that have identified them and targeted them as, as leaders that they want to get rid of. Even when the Black Lives Matter movement first started, right? The FBI started looking at them and characterized them as a threat. Right, so we're talking about in the 2000s. We're not talking about in the
Yeah.
1800s, the 1900s. We're not talking about the 60s. We're talking about in the late the teens, the 2000s. FBI looking at them. Now, recently they have started looking at white supremacist groups and things like that. But we are not off the scale when leaders start to pop up and are very vocal about the needs for change, that people will get characterized and put into a box. So I wanted to bring light to that and the reality of that. And I think that contributes to what you're talking about. Now, that said, I think what we tried to do here, and when I say we, there are several community leaders that really are trying to open lines of communication, that are trying to create some type of coordinated effort, that are trying to bring their expertise and experience to the table and figure out ways in which that we can create an ask and a demand. I'm going to say a demand for change. I definitely want to shout out the youth, the young Black Lives Matter groups. There's BLM, there's BLM Youth, I believe. If I'm messing
Yep.
up the name, I apologize. Excuse me, there's Last Chance for Change,
Yep.
Redemption. There's all these different groups. And the beauty about those is that there are young leaders who are emerging leaders, who are unexpected leaders. As one of my mentors, Gwen McLeod is always calling people unexpected leaders because circumstances make people and force them into positions of leadership. I want to shout them out because it's their rage, it's their anger, it's their focus that is creating the conversation. And once the conversation is created, it's the other groups and people and leaders that are taking that conversation to the people that need to hear it and that are making the demands and the ask for what we need for change. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So we tried to recreate something that, mimics and models, a unified, concerted effort to get some effective systemic changes that will eliminate some of the obstacles and issues that we're facing right now. I think about NICLU, I think about Spark, I think about a number of different agencies, and then just individual leaders that really have had enough and can work together in order to get this accomplished.
Absolutely. Great response there on multiple levels. The other question from the same individual was, are you aware of any national movements to incorporate teaching tolerance as a required subject, like math or science, or teaching about inequity and about history? It seems like our education is certainly lacking, in so many relevant subjects that are going on right now. So is there anything you can identify in the educational field or any national movements that, I know that you you know, you guys are kind of working in that field. So I was just wondering if anything that you'd come up against that, you know, any movements.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say locally or nationally of you know, kind of trying to require teaching some of those more human aspects of you know, education that are essential, like teaching about, you know, tolerance and equity and learning, you know.
So I'm going to say this: if you want equity, if you want equality, if you want tolerance, and I don't like to be honest with you, I don't like the word tolerance. Um, I don't need to tolerate someone, right? I need to celebrate someone. I celebrate differences. I love different cultures. I love different groups and backgrounds. And if we're going to be real and be honest, there's very few cultures that's rooted in the lack of celebration of other cultures, right? There's one dominant culture that really is sustained and solidified based on the hate and the demise of other cultures. And we have to, and that's white supremacy, and we have to shift that, right? And so I think we need to rethink education in general. If you want um, racism to disappear, it's very simple, and we keep pretending that we don't know what to do. Teach Black history. Teach real Black history, not just to Black kids, to every kid.
Yep.
Teach Black history. Make it a requirement, not an elective. And we keep acting like this is such a monumental hurdle that we cannot get accomplished. Black history is American history,
Yep.
right? And so, how is it that we can have? There's not a single American music that was not influenced or created by African Americans. Not a single one,
Yep.
right? There's a culture of hip hop that is global. It is the #1 globally consumed culture right now. And guess what? Everyone loves it. They just don't love the people that created it. And so there's so many different examples and I um, things that we can point to that show the value of Black people's contributions, and yet we still act like it's an elective. It's only elective worthy. It's not worth talking about. There's things that we would not have today if it were not for Black folk. So teach Black history.
Yeah. And I would love to say, you know, even I would love to get to a day where we just teach American history and the African American contribution was equally represented without the need to identify it as something separate. You know what I'm saying? Where they could, you know, I don't think we're there yet because we're still not even where we're teaching, you know, we're not even teaching African American history, you know, but yeah, exactly what you said. And you know, as throughout this whole issue with George Floyd, I kept in numerous threads that happened on Facebook. I just felt compelled to share that clip from "Do the Right Thing," where you know where Mookie says, "Who's your favorite singer?" Prince.
Right.
Who's your favorite athlete? Michael Jordan. You know, he goes through all of them. And yet you're still popping that. You know what I mean? You're still talking trash, and it's always been amazing to me. You know, as someone I was raised. You know, I went to Our Lady of Solace, and then I went to Levy, and I went to Nottingham, and I was always, you know, at least, you know, my classes were always representative of the makeup of the city, at least, you know, and so hip hop culture was always something that I was raised in, bathed in, but it was always bizarre to me to see people who love the culture so much, but didn't love the people, but, you know, had this animosity at the same time, hoping to emulate you know, their heroes, whether it be Nas or Biggie or whoever, that they love so much, but at the same time having so much animosity for, you know, the people. It's just bizarre. So I guess I'll use that as a pathway to my next question. I was curious about.
Joe, before you go to the next question, I just wanted to say something about what you just said about seeking the day when American history is taught and it's equally included. I feel that, I agree, and I appreciate that. I think we need Black history, and the reason why I say we need Black history is because we have to undo centuries of bias.
Yeah.
And so before we can get to that, we've got to add some self-esteem to a people that have been stripped of it. We've got to add some respect and reverence for people who historically have looked down upon a group of people, right? And so it requires it requires sacrifice. It requires sacrifice of privilege. It
Mm.
requires that we celebrate a people that have been stepped on, because even a people that have been stepped on historically, just weaved in and introduced, even if it's equal. And that's the difference between equality and equity, right? Right?
Yes.
Is that's what we talk about on an economic level. Even with an educational level, what has happened is that we have historically taught with white privilege. So we've got to reverse that. So we need equity in education, and equity in education looks like Black history. Know the value, know who we are. We can get back to that. We
Yeah.
can get
No,
back to the level playing field.
yeah. I'm absolutely with you. You know, I think it's that day is far away. You know,
Yeah.
where we could have, you know, just teach history as history, because I do
Right.
think, like you're saying, we have so much farther to go. So I would ask you, you know, one thing something that I've always struggled with. So I was, you know, I was a rowdy youth, you know, and that definitely got accelerated by my love for Wu-Tang, Nas, Biggie. I thought myself way harder than I was. You know, so I just wondered how you navigate. You know, someone like Nas has so many songs that are like, you know, have positive messages that go through it, that, you know, and his life story, you know, about how much he read and how much he educated himself and the type of entrepreneur he was. When we talk about entrepreneurship and
Yeah.
self-education, you know, there's a lot, but there's also, you know, so much through hip hop culture that, you know, pervades with violence and you know, and it was telling the story of a time, but it can get cyclical. We can see how it at times can be cyclical. So how do you try to guide the youth onto a path of positivity and consciousness when so much of what has permeated hip hop culture has been, you know, a negative perception of you know, manhood and you know, what we try to teach, you know, what we try to teach our youth about expressing themselves and being compassionate and empathetic. So much of that is viewed in weakness. And how do you deal with some of these you know, these issues that come up as we celebrate hip hop culture, but we also have to deal with, you know, some of the violence and other things that have come along with it?
Yeah, you know, I think first off, it's important to note that it's not hip hop that's causing the violence, and hip hop that's causing all the societal ills, right? And
Yeah.
so people oftentimes we've had decades of people from C. Dolores Tucker to, you know, I mean, we've had tons of people that criticize the culture and the music and use it as a scapegoat for what the real issues are, which is systemic oppression, economic, you know, inequality, and so I think it's important to note that we can't blame the music, which is a reflection of what's going
Right.
on. It's like looking at the fruit of the tree without looking at the roots, right? It doesn't make sense. And so when I listen to hip hop, I grew up listening to hip hop. I grew up living hip hop culture. And I didn't, you know, I've done some things, but I did things because I was poor and I grew up in the hood and I wanted money and I needed some things. And, you know, it wasn't because a song told me to do it, right? And so I've always listened to hip hop as entertainment, but I've also listened to it as a reflection of what people's experiences are. You know, so if we are able to watch someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger play the Terminator, right, and he can get on TV and we see an experience from an actor's perspective, we should be able to listen to Nas and listen to what he's gone through. So I don't actually I don't listen to Nas as or any of his songs as being something negative. Nothing Nas said was negative. It was real. And that's the
Right.
difference. That's his life. And so I listened to his life, and growing up in the hood, I related because I was like, yeah, you know what? I see this every day too. I deal with this every day too. However, we have shifted a little bit. And there's a ton of good hip hop today, but we have shifted to artists talking about drugs, taking
Right.
drugs and celebrating drugs. And you know what? And I can even understand it if that's what they really did, and you can identify, you know, this person really has a problem, has an issue or whatever. But you have artists like Future who don't do the drugs but promote it because it sells, right? And that's, that's corny. That's corny to say the least, right? Um, so what we do to, short of it is this: hip hop should not exist without studying it. Hip hop is study worthy. It's one of the reasons why I teach hip hop culture at SUNY Cortland as a professor, as an adjunct professor. And it's important for us to analyze and do an exegesis of the lyrics to figure out what people were thinking, what they were going through, to relate it to their lives, because a lot of it is deep. A lot of it is reflective of the experiences that people have to live on a day-to-day basis. And we have to know what those are, right? Early on, hip hop became, when we're talking about NWA days, hip hop became wildly popular because it was a lens to look into what it was like to be black in America, for white America. So white Americans made hip hop platinum. We know that, right? And that was because they were like, hey, I want to know what it's like living in the ghetto. I want to know what it's like. I don't want to live there, and I don't want to be black, but I want to know what it's like. I want to peek in, right? And so I think very similarly, kids that are in the hood, kids that are reflected, they look like some of the artists that are doing that type of talk. They're relating because they're going through the same experiences. They're hypervigilant. They got to look around and worry about getting jumped, stabbed, shot, right? They go through the very things that these artists are talking about, and the environments, not the culture. It's not the music. It's not the culture. The environments, these forced lived environments, forces us to have a very tough exterior, a very tough persona, right?
Yeah.
And wanting to be hard. That wanting to be hard is a denial of frailty. They don't want to be frail in an environment where frail people become victims and targets, right? So we have to really understand why hip hop sounds hyper masculine, why hip hop lyrics sound the way that they sound. The one thing I don't agree with and I don't like, and I had to shift this as a man, a part of the hyper masculinity was the treatment and view and perspective of women. We've got to educate. And what we do at Good Life is that we don't ignore those types of songs. We spotlight them. If there's a song we talk about it. Oh yeah, that was a dope song. We listened to it. Yeah, all right, let's talk about it now. Where do you think they're gonna end up doing that type of thing? Where do you think that comes from, right? Why is it that he needs 30 million women in order for him to feel like a man? Let's talk about, what does it mean to be a man? What are the characteristics ideally in society of a man, and where does that come from? Because I can guarantee you, if we do the etymology of certain words about masculinity and characteristics, if we talk about the history of, uber masculine personas, I don't necessarily know if we're gonna go back to Africa. There are some communities that are like that, but there's a lot of tribal communities in Africa that were very matriarchal, right? So if we look at America, America was hyper masculine. John Wayne, right? We're talking about the frontier, the Western frontier, and the outlaw. This didn't start with hip hop. This wasn't a hip hop thing, right? So we've got to understand hip hop as a reflection or a fruit of the tree where it was born from.
Absolutely, absolutely. Great in-depth response there. So, what role? I'm curious. I know. Faith is important to you. What role does faith play? In what you're doing, and with now, my. I learned how to play guitar in the folk mask, and the folk mask for church. I was an altar boy and all that stuff. But, as a counselor now, I've had to go around to different churches that are consolidating more and more because less and less of the youth are engaged with faith. So what role does faith play with you? And do you try to bring that conversation up with the youth?
We don't weave religion into our services. I think it's important to respect different people's religions. I can praise in a mosque, I can praise in a synagogue, I can praise in a church. I think for me, it's more about spirituality. I'm very spiritual, and I talk about spirituality with kids on a one-on-one basis. We don't weave it into our programming per se. Some of our modules, we actually talk about spirituality and the perspectives, but we respect people to not necessarily agree or believe or whatever. We use it as a study, as a opportunity to kind of look at the perspective and talk about it. But I think from my personal perspective, you can't do much without spirituality. I believe in God, and I believe that God plays a key role in the work that we're doing. And I believe that the work that I'm doing and the work that we're doing at Good Life is God's work. We don't necessarily have to, raise the flag every time. Sometimes we can do His work without, necessarily painting it as a religious thing or a spiritual thing, right?
Yep.
So that's what I would say. We do talk about it with the kids, and I think that that's one of the things that's missing. For me, for my life, there were certain things that allowed me to be successful. It was martial arts, right? Kung fu, karate. It was hip hop culture. It was spirituality, and my mom taking me to church, and then it was background and foundation through parents and things like that. And we have to think about, of these things, what do kids have? Our kids doing martial arts at a large scale. Back then, it was really cool in hip hop to do martial arts because everything, as you can tell from Wu-Tang and whatever else, was centered around martial arts. It was an obsession in hip hop, that and aliens, right? But
Yep.
nowadays, kids aren't just jumping into martial arts groups like that. They're fighting on the street with guns and knives,
Yeah.
right? So that's missing. They're not going to church, as you said, right? They have hip hop. They don't have the culture. They have the music, right? And so there's a couple of things that's kind of missing. We have to try to bring all that stuff back in ways, and if not necessarily bring them back, but bring back the outcomes, bring back what came from those structures. Martial arts was structure. You know, Hip hop was identity. I knew I was proud. At least back then, songs told me to be proud. Brand Nubian. There were
Yes.
tons of songs that made me proud, and even the hardcore songs made me proud, right? And so we have to be able to bring that back for kids in different ways.
I guess that would lead me to my next question about, from there was an episode of South Park that was really funny about the dad listening to his kids' music, and it just sounded like he's listening to it, and his friends go, this this doesn't sound like anything, and he goes, no, it sounds great, and he's trying to pretend that he's still hip, like he doesn't want to admit that the music is garbage because he does he doesn't want to let on to his son and the kids that he's not hip anymore, he's an old man. And I would be lying if I said that was not a struggle that I'm constantly going through, where I was, the era we talk about, what I perceive as the golden era, from the mid 80s to around 2000, early 2000s, you go from, wild style type era, Curtis Blow, LL Cool J, Run DMC, from that era up to the Nas and the Biggies and blah, blah, blah. And then, you get to some of that Black Star, Mos Def, Talib Kweli kind of era stuff. And now it just feels to me like I try so hard, bro. Like people give me stuff and they're like, check this guy out, check this guy. I'm like, this is garbage, man. I'm just not feeling like the thing that I loved about hip hop so much. Many of the things that I love about hip hop was, for example, Tribe Called Quest, Walk on the Wild Side, sample for Can I Kick It? Or, they sampled Marvin Gaye's like Inner City Blues, for I think it was Luckalucian or one of them, and you hear classic, Blackstreet, No Diggity, that's the Bill Withers sample. And so you're kind of tipping the cap to history at that same time. I always called hip hop a form of folk music because you're taking a James Brown beat and you're reinterpreting it for a new generation. You're putting it with something else. And it just feels more like kids have a computer game, like it's a PS4, I'm too critical, man, but it's like, so I guess that long rant is to ask you what you're feeling about modern hip hop. Do you feel like an old man like I do, where you listen to new stuff and you're like, man, this doesn't have the cultural ring that something, that some of this, like you're talking about the storytelling of Nas, talk about tracks like One Love or, stuff like that, where it's this elaborate storytelling. I don't find that stuff out there. Do you think it's still out there and I'm just not finding it, or what's the goal?
I think it is out there. I know it is out there. And it's very difficult because oftentimes when it doesn't sound like what it has historically sounded like and what you're used to, it's very difficult to kind of digest. But what happens is that we have to try to listen with a different lens, right? A different ear, I should say, a different ear. And so I think that what happens is, well, for me, let me just say for me, as a DJ, I'm able to stay connected with new music because I'm still rocking. I'm still playing for young crowds. And
Yep.
so my ear has to stay young and it kind of keeps me young. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
But even still, there's some stuff that people listen to and I'm just like, oh, like what the hell is that? Like that's awful. And then what I do is, for a very long time, I was like, yo, this is trash. This is garbage. I don't want to hear it. I had to stop myself and try to step back and try to listen. So for two reasons, one as a DJ, but also to connect with these kids, I wanted to just stay open-minded. And so instead of condemning our generation, we had parents that were like, oh, what you're listening to is garbage, rock music and 60s and blue, that was the era, right? Instead of doing that, what we need to do is we say, yo, that was cool. All right, I can check it. That's cool. Now listen to one of mine.
Right.
Right? Because I'm from New York City where there's radio. We don't have radio out here. We don't have black radio. We don't have, we have radio that plays some hip hop, but we don't have black radio, right?
Yeah.
And so when you were in the city, black radio played oldies, new joints. It was different, and you got the culture. You received all of that stuff, right? And
Right.
that's not to knock the radio stations out here. It's just that it's different,
Right.
It's different when it's ran by the culture and whatever else. And so my point is that we growing up in New York, you have to know classics. Like you're not a hip hop head if you don't know classics. I don't care how young you are. Someone's exposing you to a classic song that has been timeless, right? There's kids that are growing up right now. If they're in Brooklyn, they know Biggie. They know
Right.
Jay's old stuff. They know, even classic joints past that because there's an environment that allows for that. What I've always been sad about with Syracuse and what I've always fought for is an opportunity to have a platform for us to do that here so that, again, it goes back to identity and what kids are lacking. We need to give them their identity, know where it's coming from. You're listening to new rappers and you don't even know the lyrics that they're quoting from previous rappers because you think, oh, I don't want to hear that, but they're actually quoting and paying homage to other rappers, right?
Right. Yep.
You've got young rappers that are using samples that have been used before. There's some classic samples that have been done at least 4 or 5 times.
Yep.
And kids listening like, oh, and I'm like, even in my class at Cortland, I'm like, yo, have you heard the original for that song? And they're like, what do you mean the original? I thought that was it, And you have to educate constantly people about the culture. And that's what we have to keep doing because otherwise, not just them, but us ourselves, to answer your question, let's be open. Let's be open because I'll tell you right now, there's some kids that's talking about drug use. And even though I don't like it, they've been through some stuff. They've really been through some stuff. So they're talking about how they're self-medicating and how they're coping with the issues that they're going through. And if we don't listen to them and hear them, we don't know how to engage them.
Right. That's great advice, man. I got to spend more. If I spent more time with the youth, I gotta sit down and do an exchange party with some folks and
Nice.
Get in there because I have heard it from time to time. I know that it's out there. I'm just not plugged in like I used to be. Unfortunately, I am Randy Marsh at the end of the day. I am the old dad in South Park.
I'll put you on, man. I'll put you on. I'll give you some. Yeah.
Send me something new that I can ingest. I think my last purchases. No, Jadena. I really love that album. That was pretty fire. There's some good. There's been some, but it's few and far between. It ain't like it used to be. So I could use any. So I guess I appreciate you taking this hour to meet with me. I'll give you one last question.
Sure.
And this is something that when we're here having this conversation, I've seen people dogging white allies for their silence. I've seen people dogging white allies for speaking up, because suddenly they're making the conversation about themselves. I've seen people getting dogged for asking this question, for asking people of color what should white allies be doing, or what's your thought about how white allies, people that want to show love for the cause, what would be any words of advice to those who want to support but not to step into the center of the conversation like that?
I believe the only way we push past racism is if we dialogue, if we listen, and dialogue. Um, Joyner Lucas has a song called "I'm Not Racist," and I look at that video and I think about the power of that song in that video. He has a. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Oh man, all right, you got to get on it. So Joyner Lucas has a song, "I'm Not Racist." It's the video itself is just as powerful as the song, and so you really have to. It's one of those songs where you have to um, dissect and listen to over and over again. But you need to watch the visuals as well because the video is very telling. You have a white guy and a black guy. The scenery, they're inside a factory. They're inside just this blank room. So really, the scenery is them. It's their facial expressions. It's the words. It puts a focus and emphasis on perspectives, and it really spotlights perspectives of different narratives and voices that we've heard when it's surrounding race in America. But the end of it, they shake hands and they hug, and the concept is really, you know, people have felt certain ways out of anger, out of emotions, and different things like that, out of white privilege, and if they just listen to each other and they're open to wanting to hear a different side and perspective, we can at least get somewhere. You're not going to change someone overnight, and some of the diehard and hardcore racists, you're not going to change them, period. But there's some people that say racist things. There are people that experience white privilege and they fit within a system of racism and they don't even understand how. So try telling a poor white person that they have white privilege. They're
Right.
like, what? I grew up poor, but they don't understand, because what happens in America is that we don't really understand the meanings and definitions of what we talk about. We speak from emotion and we don't speak from fact. And so when you understand what racism is and the way in which it works, then you can better understand what white privilege is and how you actually can experience and have privilege, or how I as a black man have privilege when it comes to gender and or sexuality or some of these other things. We're talking about intersectionality of oppressions, right? So let me get back to what you said about white allies. I did a very, very detailed post that was received well. Some people understood it, some people didn't. And there was one response that I got that wasn't, if you go to my page, people will find it. And I said to the white allies, I said, we have to tell you how to be an ally to us. It's not your job to decide how to be a white ally. You need to listen, you need to hear, and then you need to follow. And I think a lot of times white privilege causes white folks to want to lead all the time, to take the lead because they have been given that lead. And this is our movement. It's about us. It's about our lives. It's about staying alive. It's about our culture, our lack of representation of that culture. And so in those moments, you need to step back and follow, support by doing a number of things. Use your body to go in between us and the systems of oppression to protect us. Use your silence in a good way when we're speaking. Use your voice when we ask you to speak and tell you what to say, right? That I believe, when we say white privilege is across the board. You could be a supremacist, you could be a run-of-the-mill person who's just conservative or whatever, or you can be the most left person and still have white privilege. Perfect example. You see protests where white people are in the front yelling and screaming at police, and we're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Your actions could mean the death of our bodies, not your bodies alone. And oftentimes they did a study about the level of arrest, the types of arrest, the disparities in arrest around the country surrounding these protests. And what they identified was that the majority of people that actually got arrested were black, right? People of color. But we saw all this visual, all these photos and videos of white people rioting, looting, right? But the narrative always comes back to us. So your actions as a white ally can kill us and harm us also, right? It is time for you to follow, not to lead. That's what I believe white allyship is. Hear us and listen to us and ask us what we need, not tell us what you want to do.
Amen. Well, thank you, brother. I appreciate you very much. Thank you for spending this hour with me and talking. Is there anything else you want to say before we bounce?
We covered a lot, man. It's always great talking to you.
Is there any where people should go to find Good Life or DJ Meister? Any online,
Appreciate
websites
that.
or
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have what I will say, we have a great project right now. 215 Tully Street. We have a building. It's going to be the first ever hip hop center for youth entrepreneurship. On the where the South Side and the West Side meet. And we're in the middle of a capital campaign. We're always taking donations. People can visit our website at www.gly, that's Gary Lewis Yo-Yo, .foundation, FOUNDATION, not .org, .com, anything. It is .foundation, GLY.foundation. So I appreciate that opportunity.
Great. All right, Hasan, keep up the great work. I really appreciate you taking this time, breaking down with me and chopping it up. And keep up the great work. And if I can ever be of any use in the future, don't hesitate to reach out.
I appreciate that. Thank you, man.
All right, brother. Take care. Peace.
All right. Peace.